This video is an audio recording of the first of two of our reading group's supplemental discussions for On the Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People by Mao Zedong. This supplemental discussion will go over the context of China leading up to and after the writing of this book in February of 1957. We will not be including the entire sections of Red Pen's video in this one, so we encourage you to either watch his video ahead of time or pause this video when we get to watching each section so you can go to his video to watch the same full section we did with us. We will have timestamps up on screen for you to make sure you watch the same part we do. We'll still be here when you come back. As always, our reading groups are open to the public, and we encourage discussion of any ideas people bring to the table. This also means some of the ideas expressed in this discussion might not reflect the actual views of our party on any level. With all that said, we hope you enjoy our supplemental discussion on the context of China from 1956 to 1962. For anyone joining us in video format later, welcome to our interlude exploring the context of the book that we are reading on the correct handling contradictions among the people, China from 1956 to 1962. We're going to be watching a video and having discussion questions on each of the sections. The first section of the video is going to be Mao Zedong Thought. Video we're watching is a video by Red Pen. It is titled The History and Political Economy of Mao's China.
Karl Marx wrote that men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living. Throughout history, communist parties have always debated the extent to which men... This theoretical departure signaled that China was now clearly on its own developmental path and was no longer relying on lessons drawn from the Soviet model. It was taking a deep plunge into the unknown and no longer had the aid of historical experience to guide party decisions along the way.
All right. So, how does the Marxist or scientific left and right differ from the liberal or relative left and right? What are the common threads that make a trend left or right in the first place? So let's start with talking about what does left and right mean in general.
Well, left is more revolutionary, more willing to change now. Right is more let's do it later, more lazy, if I say.
Sure, that is actually a pretty decent definition, yeah.
I think in general, like not talking about the Marxist left and right, right is more, I would say it's more stunting. Like it's more, of course, they're conservative. They don't want things to change.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, they may even prefer that things regress to where they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was gonna add that the right tends to think that things were better back then. Maybe it's nostalgia or whatever it is, and thinks that if things were better back then, we should keep it that way.
Sure. I think you all bring up some great points. What I just define it as here is that generally being more politically left refers to advocating for ideas and policies that would progress the development of society, or progressivism. Being more right refers to advocating for ideas and policies that would conserve the society we have now or return it to a less developed, idealized past. Conservatism.
Yeah, because like even if things in the past were, you could say, were better in certain respects, these conservatives don't want to look at why it was like this. They don't look for the real reasons for why were things better then. It's more just like we need to get back to that now. Is it like simply trying to return to that would make things better? They don't look at the full picture. They're not historical materialists.
Yeah, when we talk about specifically liberal, the liberal right, especially, yeah.
Right.
But what's the Marxist left and right?
I'd say in relation to the Marxist left and right, well, this is actually kind of unrelated, but I just wanted to add it because I think it could be related.
Yeah.
On what James said about there are people who look to the past and think it was better, I think there are two very distinct ways you can do that. You can look at the past and think it was better and think we must resurrect that model and apply that model now and consolidate that model or strengthen it, right? Which is kind of what fascism was. Or we can look at it, we can think, things are better back then. And we can think, I think the model we were using back then was conducive then to things being better. But if that model can be applied now to make things better, should we use it? And I mean, well, that's a little abstract, but I mean, like when people when
Like the conditions have changed.
yeah, like it's not saying, oh, we need to bring back exactly what it was back then in every way systematically and fully integrate it. It's saying, okay, things were better back then because generally speaking, the system was conducive to things being better. But that was a specific time, those are specific conditions, and they change, and we need to understand that.
I will say there is going to be a specific example later on that we're going to talk about in which the Marxist right, taking a step backwards, was the correct thing to do considering the conditions at the time, because the conditions at the time were that they had made a mistake and tried to take too large of a leap and fell on their face.
I'd like to add to that. I
Yes.
think that a lot of people misunderstand communism, in that communism historically hasn't been this perfect, ideologically uh, stable and progressive and woke kind of model. They'll point to how under some communist societies, transgender people were mistreated, or under some communist societies, homosexuality was criminalized. And they will superficially, or they'll simplify it and associate that with communism. They'll say homosexuality was illegal because of communism. Transgenderism was illegal because of communism. And they'll completely ignore or not even know about the communist experiments wherein transgender people and gay people had more rights than they even have now in America or in the most progressive countries. So I think it's very important to emphasize that just because gay marriage isn't legal right now in China doesn't mean that the Chinese government isn't going to legalize it. Doesn't mean it hasn't legalized it because of communism.
Right. And it also does not mean that they don't treat gay people better than the United States treats gay people.
Exactly. I think there's a sort of cause and correlation situation here where social conservatism and social progressivism are kind of abstract and almost ephemeral, and that they can exist in all sorts of systems. I think sometimes, not to go on a rant here, but just real quickly, people will look at some societies and see that there are women in the government and see that gay marriage is legal and automatically correlate that with this is a good society, when that is not the case.
Right.
People don't realize that things like racism and misogyny and xenophobia not necessarily inherent to fascism, but are symptoms of it.
Yep.
With fascism, the things we know are inherent are the resurrection or strengthening of the pre-existing capitalist conditions, the protection of private property, classism, all of those things. Racism isn't inherent to fascism. So when people see a society that isn't racist, they think, oh, well, that can't be fascist, right? Taiwan can't be sympathetic to the fascist cause. There are women in the Taiwanese government, and gay marriage is legal. When that couldn't be further from the truth. We really need to draw a line there.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that there's a huge difference between like in the United States, in which liberal identity politics has really taken over the queer rights movement and has made it so that things like marriage, which really is not the biggest thing that queer people need. It's like a token big, it gets the headlines, and it can be a big event that people can rally behind, but it doesn't actually mean liberation for queer people. Whereas the queer rights movement in China is more focused on equal treatment and just generally educating people on what it means to be queer.
Right.
And because of that, there's less violent homophobia in China than you see here.
Yeah, I think this is the last thing I'll say on this.
Mhm.
When it comes to like Western media and how it misconstrues things that are going on in other countries.
Mhm.
With China, and the gay rights movement in China, or the queer rights movement in general, our media will focus on things and try to make it seem like they're similar in our goals, right?
Mhm.
Gay people in China tried to legalize gay marriage in China, a lot like gay people in America succeeded in doing. And
Mhm.
because America is liberal, it succeeded. And because China is communist, it's not working. When really, like you're saying, the focus of gay Chinese individuals is not just legalizing marriage, but is a broad, sweeping kind of systematic education
Exactly.
development. It's not
Yep.
just that. It's not just one thing. And
It's the struggle of unity, criticism, unity, if you will.
right. And this is esoteric, but on social media, some liberals are saying that if Kamala won, we would be having brunch now. Gay marriage was just constitutionally protected, so now people are saying things like, I'm gay and now I feel safe and comfortable.
Mhm.
It's the equivalent of we'd be having brunch right now just because gay marriage was protected.
Because the government's only half of the story.
Exactly.
Right.
Other people should also be educated just as much as the government should be.
Not to
Right.
mention, discrimination protection has not been passed by the government.
Right.
Mm.
Well, what happens, I think, is that people are motivated by different things, and some people are motivated by power,
Mhm.
and wealth buys you power,
Mhm.
and so those usually go together. And they'll put any coalition together that works for them.
Yep.
So clearly, our current president doesn't give a crap about religion. He
Uh-huh.
wouldn't place his hand on the Bible when he took the pledge. So it's just whatever coalition you can put together to get power.
Yeah.
And I don't know that anything besides that motivates them.
Yeah.
I mean, I taught leadership classes, and what I firmly believe is you look at what's motivating something, and that's pretty much going to predict the result
Mhm.
of what they're doing. And there's a theory that you should look at. It's power, affiliation, and accomplishment. And it assumes it's not a complete theory on it, but it's just looking at those things that everybody, like a pie, is certain amounts of this, that, or the other thing. And so some people join an organization to affiliate. They want to be part of something.
Mhm.
And they're not really that concerned about what it's doing.
Yeah.
They just like the idea of being a part of it.
Right.
And there's a book, an old book, True Believers, about that.
Yeah.
The desire to belong. There's other people that are trying to accomplish something. And that can be something in the physical world, like build the bridges or highways or whatever, or in the social world build organizations and things like this. And then there are others that are just in it for the power.
Yeah.
And the most dangerous are the people that's in it for the power because they don't give a crap what they build or tear down as long as they can keep some kind of coalition together.
Yeah.
But so
I will say,
saying that certain people believe things, no, they just need those people in their coalition.
yeah. I will say, like, within our own party, like, you will see what you were talking about, like, people will join to just be part of it, and then they won't, like, actually get involved. Like, there's been a number of people that we've gotten membership applications for. We've reached out, and maybe they just don't even get back to us. They just want to say, "Oh, I signed up for the party," and it's like, but you're not really a member, though.
I support building bridges.
Uh-huh.
Build anything.
No, I don't want to come out and build it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And the other thing, again, one of my principles of education, reality is the crutch. So right now, in terms of our economic system, our leadership ideas are not developing things for everyone. It's clearly having been 75 years old, there were certainly times that were better in some regards, but certainly not in every. You know, I started college and the state of Wisconsin was paying over 85% of my tuition, basically. My tuition was $235 a semester to begin with. And there were no black students. So, you know, there's that good part and then there's that bad part. And we've made progress in certain regards.
Yeah.
Now we have black students and they can't afford to go either. It's the white students who can't afford to go now.
Yes.
So, but it's not an either or thing.
Yeah.
The economy worked very well. Let's just take 1957. My dad was supporting the family, plus my grandfather lived with us on one job. On one job.
Yeah.
He wasn't killing himself. You know, he was working 40, maybe 50 hours a week. Some Saturdays he had to go in. Sometimes he took me with and I went down. And they were recycling World War II airplanes. So it was a dirty place he worked, but he was in charge of shipping and receiving. So you didn't have to do that kind of work, but it was interesting there for a kid. And 20 years later, you needed two people to support a family. And again, my major was how business industry worked. Well, the way it worked was they wanted more profit. The owners wanted more profit.
For sure.
And I formed a workers' co-op at one point to do solar work back in the 80s. In the solar industry was destroyed just as it's being destroyed now. I'm convinced now that people should own the place where they work.
Yes.
That it should be in the original Marx that I read that was kind of the idea that the workers would own the place that they worked. And that's not unreasonable. If that were the case, I worked at a box factory. The cool thing about my summer work was it was diverse. When I was going to school, I worked at a box factory. And with what I knew about business, they were doing some incredibly stupid things. And everybody on the floor, all the union members, knew it. And we had 3 departments, not including shipping. And 2 of the department heads, supervisors, foremen, you might say, through some mistake, were gone on vacation. Production went up. because the workers we were getting piece rate.
Yeah.
And so they wanted things to go smoothly. So they worked together instead of, when I left, because I took a class, every summer job I had was a class. I signed up for it. And that was the typical thing to do at Stout. You would sign up and then you would turn in weekly reports and then you do a report at the end. And I told them, I said, this is nuts. You've got every department who your buddy against the other department. And I found the department heads were getting paid based on the piece rate of their department instead of the piece made of the whole place, which it didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, but you really need to understand, see the big picture of what's going on.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
And that's why Nixon didn't bring that particular major up. The Department of Education was about to put it out and cancel the whole thing. We don't want them to know how that works.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Actually, like connecting this back to what we were talking about with the reading group, the Marxist left-right, it refers to its relation to a given trend's relation to the scientific center. The scientific center itself is whatever is going to work best given the material circumstances to advance the entirety of society, all of society. So when we talk about the Marxist left to right, the left may let dogmatism get in the way of maintaining a scientific outlook or ignore material conditions in favor of a permanent revolution. They can push things faster than it really should, faster than material conditions allow, faster than the people are ready for. and end up making mistakes or just not be able to get the organizing done that it needs to be done. The right, on the other hand, is overly cautious and conservative in carrying out revolutionary action. They refuse to push the envelope and play things safe. They typically don't have an outline for progressing society's development. Both the left and right in practice end up being less progressive than the scientific center due to their failings to develop proper strategy and action, and because the political left is generally defined as those that are more progressive. The left in these terms only is only the left in rhetoric, not in practice. The scientific center is also not static and will shift in what it advocates for from time to time and place to place, depending on the material circumstances, making it so a given policy might be right deviationist in one situation, left deviationist in another situation, and then align with the scientific center in a third. As for the liberal left-right, the liberal left-right refers to an ideology's relation on the scale of generally accepted liberal political thought. And liberal in this sense is, it includes what Americans call conservatives, just because liberalism is the current trend, although that might be changing as we might move closer to fascism. But generally, it has historically been what is generally accepted in the liberal bourgeois politics.
How would you, for the layman, because I mean, sometimes even I get confused, define the liberal and liberalism in as simple as possible?
Liberalism are just those that are essentially just advocate for universal suffrage and individual rights. It's a very individualistic ideology. It can align with Marxism when, like, back in the day.
Well, it's if you're talking about like against like a
right.
entrenched nobility or
right.
feudal system.
Right. In the sense that back in the day, at least, liberals wanted to increase the amount of democracy that we saw in society. However, nowadays, we have enough democracy for liberals. Liberals don't want to expand democracy beyond what we have right now.
Some liberals. Just so you know, I'm active in the Democratic Party. And
Yeah.
I'm with the millennials.
Yeah. By like expanding democracy beyond what we have right now is, I mean, like economically, like we understand our society in the United States right now to be what we call the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Money gets you power. And therefore, what we have now is really only democracy for the rich. We want to expand that democracy to be democracy for the vast majority of the people, the democracy for the working class. The liberals do not want that. And usually, if you do want that, you probably aren't a liberal, honestly. You might, even if you think you might be, you might not actually be.
I'm not a Chuck Schumer liberal.
Yeah.
Liberal. The basis is pretty simple. I keep trying to make it simple. Folks is folks.
Yeah, I think it's really important to bring that up on the topic of liberalism, not inherently always bad.
Yeah.
And I know it's probably not completely correct in reference to material conditions and his character. I admire FDR because I think that he handled classical liberalism in a way that acknowledged the American democracy in a way that is today seen as dictatorial, but was really more democratic. And he introduced the kinds of reforms that America needed to be more democratic, or at least to head in that direction. Okay.
We're getting off topic. We need to...
Okay, sorry.
FDR is complicated.
He is complicated, yeah.
I would
in
call
the-
him a
in the
social
end,
fascist, but
Politics is the, and I had a congressman telling me, politics is the art of the possible. And you can't lead a band if there's no band behind you,
Yeah.
so,
Right.
yeah.
yeah. All right.
It's tricky.
Any additional thoughts on this section, the first section here? All right. So this next section is going to cover the 100 Flowers campaign. This is from 1956 to 1957.
In February 1956, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev delivered his secret speech at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The speech presented a However, the campaigns were not entirely irredeemable. Intellectual freedom flourished for a period and generally continued on in the natural sciences. The wave of criticism towards the party allowed it to gain a more intimate grasp of urban grievances. It exposed rightist tendencies and allowed the party to respond to the scattered and scant ideological elements that continued to resist the road to socialism. But perhaps most importantly, the 100 Flowers campaign laid much of the political and ideological groundwork for the launch of the Great Leap Forward.
All right. Having read the section on the 100 Flowers campaign at our last reading group and learning this additional context, what do you think about the termination of the policy shortly after the book that we were reading?
Well, it probably didn't look good to some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the ideas, debating ideas, but the fact that bad ideas, rightist ideas were coming up as part of the free ideas idea was a bad aspect of it, and I don't think there would have been any other way to combat that without cracking down.
I mean, I used to think of the 100 Flowers campaign as Mao giving people free speech so that people could criticize him, and then he could arrest or kill the people who criticized him. But I mean, like now, I understand that Mao did it without really anticipating that these sorts of reactionary ideas were going to bloom or fester in this campaign. He did not anticipate this. He did not seem to expect that sympathy for fascists and fascist sympathizers was still so prolific in some areas of China. And he was probably kind of shocked, and the party was probably kind of shocked. And in reaction to their own shock, they resorted to cracking down. And a lot of that cracking down was excessive, and Mao himself acknowledged that. So, you know, people will misconstrue that. They'll say Mao did it so he could figure out who didn't like him and kill them. But that's not true.
Well, technically, revealing if and where reactionaries existed was from the very beginning like a stated part of this campaign, not to go and arrest them, but so that you just know that they exist and you can take that into account in your actions. Whereas if they just remain silent, you don't know that they exist and they could be doing anything. Any other thoughts on the termination of the policy?
Historically speaking, very funny, very memeable. I mean, just generally from like the most communist standpoint,
Yeah,
it's just like free speech campaign. Oh, taking that back. It's funny. I mean, whatever the reasons are valid. They made sense, but it's still, you know, funny.
Well, remember last time when we were discussing the 100 Flowers campaign, we discussed that one reason why it might not be viable is that if the immediate danger from people being able to speak out is not something that the worker state can handle at the moment. Like if you're in the middle of a revolution, civil war or something, in which you don't have time to be having like debates, and you're like actively fighting against reactionaries who are trying to prevent the workers from taking power. Or immediately afterwards, in which there are still probably reactionary elements within society that are trying to topple a fresh workers' state. Now, the Chinese, and this is what I'm saying here, the Chinese obviously knew their own situation better than we can. And as we discussed, there may be situations in which the 100 flowers policy is not practical, being when the immediate instability from dissidents could endanger the entire revolution altogether. However, I would argue that there are a number of factors that suggest that this might not have been the case in their situation. First of all, the fact that only a year later, there was enough mass support to warrant launching as grand campaign as the Great Leap Forward. For two, up to that point, the Communist Party had not based its support on the intellectuals, but on the workers and peasants, and did not require the immediate pacification of the intellectuals to maintain their power. Remember, this is mostly a policy aimed at intellectuals, and the workers and peasants really weren't the ones saying anything reactionary. It was all confined to within the intellectuals. These reactionary sentiments were generally not coming from within the party as well, as was the case as the reactionary elements within the Soviet Union, but from outside the party, meaning there wasn't a real threat of Kuomintang takeover of the party itself. And finally, even within the intellectuals, the majority of the criticism on the democracy wall in Beijing University still assumed the leadership of the party and only asked for grievances to be corrected. The reactionary elements were still in the minority, even among the intellectuals. So, unless there is something about the situation that I do not know about, I'm honestly not sure if it was necessary to end the 100 Flowers campaign.
I think a lot about, drawing comparisons between 100 Flowers campaign, which I'll just kind of shorthand as free speech, in China in the 1950s, and say the free speech that sort of predominates in the United States and other Western bourgeois democracies. And a couple of things occur to me. One, our own free speech here is not absolute, and
Yes.
kind of like what we were talking about, what I forget who was saying, I think it was Jade saying this just a few minutes ago. In the United States, we tend to let people say whatever they want to say, but the moment that speech appears to be leading to actual action that's going to get in the way of profit and control by the capitalist state and the bourgeoisie, they tend to crack down in some form or fashion on that speech. Now, because of our Constitution and our amendments, they can't just like turn off the spigot, as it were. But still, there's this intricate interplay between the balance of wanting to give free speech, whether in reality or at least give people the feeling that they have free speech, but then also speech can lead to other ideas and ideas can lead to action, and that can be very dangerous for the ruling class. And that cuts our way as well. Like, I understand what you're saying here about how, hey, they probably didn't need to end the 100 Flowers campaign, but at the same time, there were at that point many examples, and there have been many examples since then, of shit just kind of getting out of control. And like, it can be really dangerous to do that, to allow these kinds of ideas to circulate, particularly when you're trying to build a revolutionary society, because um reactionary forces either within the country or from outside the country will use some of these liberties as a way to destabilize the existing regime. Now, if the regime or the social order is stable enough, that's going to be harder than just, oh, we're going to talk a lot of big game. Like, you're going to have to put in a lot more effort to translate the ideas into actual dangerous action. But you don't know beforehand where that tipping point is. And so I tend to agree, like, okay, it's in an ideal world where these countries weren't living under a state of siege socialism, like, yeah, I would want everyone to be able to just speak their mind and do the whole unity, criticism, unity, and free speech and all that stuff. That sounds awesome. In the real world, things have and can get out of hand very, very quickly. And I think a revolutionary government has a responsibility to its constituency, to the people, to the party, to the rank and file, to not let that happen. I'm not saying that the Chinese government here was correct to end this campaign. I just wanted to point out that um, free speech has always been managed. No one has ever had absolutely free speech anywhere in history. And it needs to be managed just like everything else needs to be managed in a revolutionary situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add to that and say that I think we overemphasize like how much free speech we have in a liberal democracy.
Yeah.
The thing is, basically how free your speech is just correlates to how much money you have and the capital you own. So, if you own a news corporation, right, you can put whatever you want out there. Some guy like screaming into the void on like Facebook or something, or just, it really doesn't matter. You can just filter out all that stuff anyway. There's, this capitalist mode of production.
Yeah.
Like it's not profitable. It's not profitable to like put socialists on the news, for example.
Yeah.
For example, so
yeah,
like it's not really free speech for socialists.
Yeah, can we think of any like middle class or even impoverished individuals who have the same reach as like Beyonce?
Right.
No. I think that's
Well, and
such a good point.
although Beyonce kind of is still a worker.
Jay-Z is not.
She's a billionaire.
Yes,
She is
but
Huh.
wealth is not relation to the means of production.
She still produces music, but she's a rich music producer.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Does
Like
own
she-
her own
I
record
don't-
She should
She
be.
knows a lot about.
She should be supported,
Yeah.
but not
Yeah.
her power shouldn't be supported.
You mistake paid speech for free speech, and they're
Yeah.
probably different things.
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's really important to keep in mind, like what Luli was saying, that I think Americans tend to conceptualize free speech only in relation to the government. The government can't punish us for saying that we don't like the government. We can all say F this guy, F that person, screw that leader, screw that billionaire. We can all say that publicly as much as we want. And the government won't do anything. I think, one, we need to recognize that the government is run by and for corporations, and that corporations are actually actively limiting free speech particularly on social media platforms like Twitter, X, Facebook, Meta, all these places, YouTube. Like, we all know the story of like how bad the algorithms get and how they're constantly being tweaked to what do they call those, shadow bans or stifle the left and amplify the right. That is a restriction of speech in action that has a real material impact on the world. And that's the other point that I wanted to make is like, great, I can stand on a corner and yell F Donald Trump as much as I want, but like that's not going to actually change anything. But if Peter Thiel goes on CNN or Fox News or whatever and says, well, I think we should do this, this, and this, because I think that would be better for the economy and better for the American people, what are the odds that that's going to actually translate to policy and law and a shift in the economy? Pretty high, way higher than me just standing on a corner yelling, I want communism. So like you have to think about not just, free speech isn't just about what the government can and cannot do.
Right.
It's about how speech can translate into actions in society.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already regulated by capitalism itself.
Yeah. I do want to really point out, like really emphasize that the 100 Flowers campaign was just people's ability to talk, not actively work against the government. So the campaign, Mao originally cited revealing reactionaries as a benefit of the campaign itself. And if the reactionaries actually worked against the government, they could then be dealt with. The campaign puts a spotlight on them. They put a spotlight on themselves, and then you can just watch them.
Was there evidence that they were organizing or doing any sort of like explicitly anti-state activity?
I don't know.
I mean, I think that's the main thing.
Not that I know of, but I also have not really looked in depth into that.
Yeah.
Regardless, if they were, you can then go in and crack down on them then. Speech is speech, action is action.
Yeah.
So in the end, revealing the existence of these reactionaries was good for the party. They revealed these reactionaries, and then these reactionaries were dealt with. Maybe a bit too harshly, but in the end, the campaign was still beneficial to the party all around.
And yeah, if you know that people are grumbling, I mean, it's good to know, so then you can perhaps address their issues.
Exactly.
Try to further integrate them into society.
Did the Soviet Union, earlier in its history, so comparatively around the time China did the 100 Flowers campaign in the Soviet timeline, did the Soviet Union ever try to do something like the 100 Flowers campaign?
I don't think so, Daniel.
Not to my knowledge, no. There were very specific material conditions for that. I won't go into them here because this isn't the time, but I will just very briefly say, from like the day after the October Revolution, the reactionary forces were very, very vocal about their absolute intent to overthrow the workers' government. And the Civil War saw participation from capitalist nations all over the world on the side of the whites. And then after the Civil War, the Soviet Union was very, very isolated internationally. And so that's different from China, who in the 1950s, well, at that point, they're partners with the Soviet Union, although obviously the relationship unfortunately starts to fray right around this time because of the secret speech. Again, that's a different thing. But like socialism at that point has beaten back the immediate fascist threat, which was not the case in the 1920s and 1930s in the Soviet Union. And so those material conditions meant that they needed to take a different approach to this whole idea of free speech.
Yep. And the final point that I wanted to point out is that having the policy remain in place would have been extremely helpful in preventing the disaster during the Great Leap Forward and restraining the developing left deviationist tendencies that brought it about. So what further context on our reading on the correct handling contradictions among the people did you get from this section?
A lot.
Yeah, I didn't know about the 100 Flowers campaign until now.
I didn't really understand it.
So is this supposed to be like a guidebook for, cadres in dealing with disputes? Like,
essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. The next section is the Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1961.
Uh-oh.
Oh, God.
Oh.
Stomach ache.
Ouchie. Ouchie.
While pockets of revolutionary fervor continued to flourish in the cities, especially among students and youth, Mao's general focus remained on the peasantry. The great success of the peasantry in not only meeting but exceeding quotas and deadlines for agricultural collectivization led Mao to believe that the peasantry was in advance of the party bureaucracy, and that many officials were dragging behind the masses like women with bound feet. Mao believed that it was necessary for the party to catch up to the masses, and announced the introduction of the Great Leap Forward in January 1958. The Great Leap Forward campaign was which may have directly or indirectly impacted the overall population growth during this period. The party eventually learned about the rise of famine in the countryside through peasant soldiers in the People's Liberation Army, who had received letters from their families reporting on the conditions of the peasantry. Many of these soldiers informed their superiors on what they were being told, which eventually made its way to the higher ranks before the Great Leap Forward was brought to an abrupt halt in 1961.
All right. So the discussion question I have here, what left deviationist ideas can you identify in the policies of the Great Leap Forward? Since we're like really running out of time on the discussion, I'm going to share what I had here and then we can see what you thought about these. So what I identified was the idealization of the peasant, wanting to develop peasants into intellectuals and industrial proletariat rather than rely on the already existing intellectuals and proletariat. Another, connected with the previous point, asking the peasants to take on 3 roles at once: farm work, industrial work, and intellectual work. This reduces their efficiency in all 3 areas and takes much needed labor away from food production. Next, the complete rejection of intellectuals rather than addressing the disconnection of intellectuals from the working masses, while educating the peasants to develop labor innovators, to use a term from the DPRK, was a very good policy. There's only so much someone dedicated primarily to farm labor can do. Instead of rejecting the intellectuals outright, the government should facilitate and encourage already existing intellectuals from the cities go out and live among the peasants to study their work and research improvements in food production, while also providing pathways for children of peasant families to receive an education in the city, then return to the countryside to help develop methods to make the lives of the peasants easier. Finally, turning a huge effort of the labor of the peasants to extremely decentralized industrial construction and development without even conducting research on the effectiveness of such industry, or in the case of the backyard furnaces specifically, consulting anyone that had any knowledge whatsoever of steel production.
Did not go very well.
Yeah. So what do we think? What do we think of the left deviationist ideas that I identified here?
I think we had talked earlier about left, right, and Marxist terms, and how, if I remember correctly, we had said that the left deviation in Marxism is like vaguely anti-intellectual in the ways that you outlined here. Not like anti-intellectual, not anti-intellectual. I think it was anti-scientific.
Yes.
And so there are the ways here, but also, the 4 pests campaign. Like,
Yeah.
I get it, man. I don't like mosquitoes and flies either, but trying to kill all of them just inherently sounds like if you have just the tiniest grasp of how an entire ecosystem works, like knocking out an entire brick of that ecosystem is like just a bad idea. But they just didn't do that because they weren't focused on the scientific nature of what it was that they were doing. They just thought it's a good idea, so it'll work, and it didn't.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one that I should have included.
I think the idealism is the biggest part of this.
Yeah.
Instead of not even left deviationists. Like some of this stuff is like,
They can go hand in hand.
well, they go hand in hand, but I think idealism here is the biggest thing because
Mhm.
all these just are, conjuring in your mind, you're conjuring a way that you want society to be
Mhm.
run or for like production to develop or whatever.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work in reality. This is
Right.
all like you're trying to force your your consciousness onto the world.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, just to say real quick, this is why we as a party should identify that it is often the case that the individuals who wear, or the people who try to identify with the labels of Maoist or Marxist-Leninist Maoist, often suffer a lack of understanding of how this idealism was so devastating to the Great Leap Forward. And I think that manifests in a lot of Marxist-Leninists saying Maoists are utopian, right? Maoists are, that word I see used a lot, utopian. And I think that does encapsulate why, like, the term Maoist, Marxist, Leninist Maoist, is almost kind of dangerous. Because even Mao himself said not to use those terms.
Yeah, for sure. It also Maoists, people that call themselves Maoists also tend to emphasize a lot of the stuff that Mao did later in life after he had frankly begun to go senile, yeah. And was very both
I mean,
idealist, becoming more and more idealist, and then also
Mentally decentralized.
Yeah.
Wah, wah.
It's, okay, I was on a village board
Mm-hmm.
in a small town, 1,200 people.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a we had a Korean War surplus Jeep, basically
Mm-hmm.
truck that we were using to plow snow. I thought that was really cool. You're really getting your work out of that. And then once I was on the board,
Mm-hmm.
the head of public works says, we need a new Jeep. And I said, well, I don't know. He says, well, go plow some snow with it. Yeah, we needed a new Jeep.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to go out in the field and give it a try and then say, yeah,
Yeah.
that's not working.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Next thing is humans conquering nature was a common idea in early socialist thought. Given a modern scientific view and knowledge of the current climate crisis, what is wrong with this idea? What should we instead strive for in our relationship with nature? Give it just a minute. Ideas?
The climate is not usually a thing that we conquer. It's usually a material condition applied to us.
Yes.
We should not view working with nature or utilizing it as conquering it.
Yes.
I think that word inherently is bad.
Yep. Yeah.
I think the idea of conquering nature is almost definitely a holdover from like liberal industrial capitalism, like hurrah. And so
Yeah.
the socialists are thinking, oh, well, we'll just do this better. And then everyone's living standards will also go up even more than under capitalism,
Yeah.
with very little understanding of, again, the ecology and all that stuff.
Yeah. So basically, humans are part of nature. We must coexist with it rather than fight against it. Developing society can only come from studying our environment and learning how to better make use of it. Trying to force it to bend to our will rather than developing society around nature can have devastating consequences because we exist within that very nature ourselves. Additional thoughts on this section? All right. We're going to skip the next section because it's not relevant. Just kidding. We were running out of time for the slot we reserved the room at the library for, so we skipped this section because it wasn't relevant enough to warrant using what few minutes we had left on it. However, it is still some nice context to know, so I will be going over it quick as a special treat for those of you watching on YouTube. This section is on the Lushan Conference of 1959.
Throughout all of China, Mao became the single most important symbol of revolutionary excellence. His name was sacred, his photo was in every home, his quotes were widely memorized, repeated, and publicized. He personally held extraordinary influence over the members of the Communist Party as well as the people of China, and was seen almost as a type of genius, intellectually standing above all others, militarily, philosophically, and politically. However, by 1959, some leading party officials were beginning to express doubts towards Mao's leadership and the direction he was taking the party. In the summer that year, a meeting of top party officials gathered at the Lushan Conference to review the progress of the Great Leap Forward. Before the conference, Mao charged the Soviets with sabotaging China's efforts and condemned Khrushchev's treachery as a major contributing factor to the overall crisis. The perceived betrayal of the Soviet Union in China's most dire moment of need delivered a sharp blow to the socialist solidarity between the Soviet Union and the People's Republic. Tensions culminated with the Sino-Soviet split in 1961, with Mao declaring that the USSR was a social imperialist rival, posing a danger to China as threatening as the one posed by US imperialism.
Alright, so there aren't any questions for this section, but I do have an additional bit of information for you. According to a speech at the 7,000 Cadres Conference in 1962 by Liu Shaoqi, Peng Dehuai was targeted not for criticizing the Great Leap policies, as many other comrades had done without retribution, but for leading an anti-party clique, his connections to the Soviets, and the suspicious circumstances wherein he was out of the country for several months at a military conference, then hurriedly wrote the letter to Mao immediately on returning home, all of which suggested the possibility that he was attempting to instigate a takeover of the party on behalf of the Soviet Union. We have a source for that there. It is in Chinese, but you could translate the page through whatever software or just Google. And that was from paragraphs 15 and 16. I'll make sure to include the link in the description of the video. Now back to the recording. The conservative reaction. The title of this section, the conservative reaction, is using the term conservative in regards to a conservative application of Marxism. This is completely different from what a conservative reaction would look like in the American sense. We're also not talking about social conservatism, but economic. In the situation of coming out of a period of left deviation with drastic consequences, this overall was the correct response corresponding to the scientific center, correcting the previous incorrect policies, regardless of whether or not certain specific policies in this conservative reaction may or may not have deviated too far to the right.
When the Bolsheviks confronted widespread famine in the aftermath of the Russian Civil War, Lenin introduced the new economic policy to revive and stabilize the economy. The new economic policy temporarily reintroduced market mechanisms, private property, and wage labor as a strategic retreat or pause on socialist construction in order to promote stability, order, and efficiency in the face of disorder and humanitarian crises. The new economic policy was embraced by some and hated by others, but ultimately the policy was successful in stabilizing prices and grain production, providing fresh ground for a renewed advance toward socialism. China's version of the new economic policy began in 1960 to 1961 as a series of emergency measures to combat food shortages and famine. He became increasingly concerned with the party's right-wing turn, as well as the growing problem of corrupt officials, but his complaints largely fell on deaf ears. While he retired from party activities, he refused to accept a diminished influence, remain sidelined, or be relegated to a merely symbolic role. In political isolation, Mao began formulating a political strategy that would steer the People's Republic back onto the socialist road.
And then we,
Mao.
yeah. All right. So we're going to go through these super duper quick. I'm going to do the same thing that we did before, give my answer, and then ask for any comments. Despite the Great Leap policies putting peasants up on a pedestal, why and how did these new policies that may have been more to the right on paper actually end up improving the lives of the peasants more? It took a materialistic approach to resource logistics and distribution, provided tools and resources for the peasants to make their work easier, and successfully eliminated the famine caused by the Great Leap policies. Party cadres were also assigned to rural areas and villages to better assess the people's actual conditions. Refocusing industrial production back into the cities also provided increased production efficiency, allowing for greater production and greater access to goods overall. Comments? All right. Next, why is it so important to have a correct understanding of why and how our previous success was achieved when setting goals for the future? We must constantly analyze and learn from where we've come to be able to set proper attainable goals that still push ourselves to do more than we otherwise might have. However, as seen in the Great Leap policies, not properly understanding why we have seen past successes may lead us to attempting a great leap we're not actually capable of making, at best wasting our time and effort, at worst resulting in a disaster like the famine seen in China. Comments?
Concerns.
Yeah. Why should we not hide our mistakes or exaggerate our successes when reporting on party activity?
Because people don't like it when we do that.
Yeah.
Causes unrealistic expectations of future goals.
Exactly.
It completely undermines the connection between the party and the people.
Yes.
Makes us look bad and makes it easier for reactionaries to make us look bad.
Yep. Proper policy depends on a proper understanding of our circumstances. We act as a collective, and our goals and tasks are larger than any one person or group. If one person misrepresents reality, save face, or look good, it can affect the entire party. It can also lead to unrealistic expectations for the ones that made the false report. Had their reports been accurate, the expectations would be perfectly reasonable, but because the expectations of them end up based on the false reports, these expectations become impossible for them to actually fulfill given the reality of the situation that the one holding these expectations weren't made aware of. Finally, what must we keep in mind when figuring out the correct balance of bureaucracy for a given situation? Said, over-bureaucratization can lead to the party becoming disconnected from the masses, restrict revolutionary action, and in general can be a pain in the ass for everyone. But too little bureaucratic oversight can result in too much irregularity in how things are handled from place to place, resulting in general confusion, and result in unreliable and/or not enough information being collected to make proper decisions.
We have to try to find a happy medium and understand that being perfectly in the happy medium is unrealistic, so we should just aspire towards it realistically.
Yep. And we must keep all this in mind and weigh the costs and benefits to strike the proper balance of bureaucracy in a given situation. Yep. Comments on that? Additional thoughts on this section?
Just because it feels gross to have to go back to market mechanisms doesn't mean it's necessarily the worst decision.
Correct, yeah. Final thoughts on all of this in additional context?
This was awesome.
Thank you.
Agree.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us and have a good night.
Matt says it was also additionally based.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye again.
Bye.
It's a good meeting.
Thank you for watching this recording of our reading group, and thank you to everyone that attended. We hope you got something out of this. This was the final discussion we had at the last reading group, but because of the logistics and the busy schedules of our two different video editors, this will likely be the first of the videos from that reading group to be uploaded. But that does work out, since the chapter most relevant to this supplemental discussion is the chapter covering the 100 Flowers policy, which we read and discussed in the most recent video uploaded prior to this one. It will also help intersperse some additional reading between this and the other supplemental discussion that we'll have at the beginning of our next reading group. Speaking of, look out for those videos covering Chapter 9 on the question of disturbances created by small numbers of people, and Chapter 10, Can Bad Things Be Turned into Good Things?, which we'll be releasing this weekend. I know this video and the last one were both fairly long, but don't worry, that won't be the case for these next two videos, which will each be less than 20 minutes. Then, on Tuesday, November 25th, we will have our final reading group for this book. There, we will have a supplemental discussion on Marxist economics and industrial development, then use the context from both that and the supplemental discussion in this video to critically examine the final two chapters on practicing economy and China's path to industrialization in the context of this book being written immediately preceding the disaster of the Great Leap Forward. In this, we will turn bad things into good things by taking what we can learn from the experience of our Chinese comrades so we don't make the same mistakes ourselves. With all that out of the way, if you enjoyed this video and would like to attend a reading group live, feel free to reach out to us via email at milwaukee@cpusa.org, DM us on any of our social media, or just come say hi to us at an event that we're at. Our reading groups are hybrid meetings with both in-person and virtual options, and we'd love to see more of the community attend in whatever form they can. Solidarity, everyone, and see you next time with Chapter 9 on the question of disturbances created by small numbers of people.